Thank you both for such a great set of presentations. I'm anxious to dive in. We've got a lot of questions to go. So why don't we start and I'll ask each one of you a question, and then I'll start throwing questions to both of you, and whomever wants to answer first is welcome too. So Rajan, you really discussed how businesses should think about their business objectives first, to know how AI might be most useful. So how do businesses then begin to work with Google's AI for Business team? And tell us a little bit more about the life cycle of those relationships.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it starts kind of both top down and bottom up. So bottom up from the developers and data scientists within an organization, utilizing the technologies, the set of technologies that we have or that others have to start to build out the foundation of how they do things. And then top down, really starting from the KPIs that a company has and trying to figure out from there, where does AI best apply? One thing that I found is that just about every KPI that I've heard from customers, there's a way that AI can actually help get you there. And I think then it's about dissecting that. And so we actually start at that level and try to work with customers to really figure out what does transformation mean for them. And then dissect that into, okay, here are steps that you can take over the next 6 months, the next 1 year, the next 5 years to really get there.
Great. And Alex, I'm wondering, are there specific job categories or talent pools that have had the most success for Pymetrics methods? And have you begun to really check the validity of your predictions with job fit and function once people are actually in those jobs?
Yeah, both of those are really interesting questions. So Pymetrics started out working largely in the white collar space, and so we've worked extensively in finance and consulting and that sort of industry. But we've really broadened our scope extensively. These days, I would say about half of our candidates coming through are white collar and about half are blue collar. And we really cover at this point the entire enterprise, provide solutions for the entire enterprise. And, to your point, as we do that, it's really important to establish that the predictions we're making are actually valid. And we have a whole team of IO psychologists who help with this and help develop kind of psychometric and rational metrics for the validity of our assessments. And we also just do a lot of statistics. So we do a lot of statistics as we build our models and make sure that we think that they will perform well before we deploy them. And we do a lot of follow-up studies, what the hiring landscape calls predictive validity. And kind of as I alluded to in my talk, the interesting thing is these are not just kind of product deliverables, but these are actually key to the regulatory lens. So when a company is audited to assess any hiring discrimination, the auditors will actually look specifically at these metrics. So it's really important that we get them right, both before deployment and kind of after we ship it out the door.
Great. So this is an audience question for Rajen. So how confident can we feel that text analytics are both contextually relevant and accurate for extracting real requests, requirements, or insights? And where and who do you see text analytics done the best, either in government or in industry? And do these by definition require deep learning capabilities?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think, the real answer is it really depends on the use case. There are cases where it works really well. There are cases where it doesn't work well. And it depends also on the training data that you have to be able to create the right algorithms. What I've seen is that one place where this is working really well is in contact center, both in terms of building out contact center infrastructures with conversational AI to be able to automatically answer questions, but then also being able to aid the contact center agents and do analytics of what's going on in a contact center. It doesn't necessarily need deep learning technology, but the deep learning technology makes a huge leap over previous technologies. And so as I'm looking at, for example, a lot of the transformer algorithms that are out there, things like the BERT algorithm that we work on. The results are really amazing. And again, it depends on the data, but then the accuracy is quite a bit. And it can turn kind of unstructured data into structured data that you can then do more analysis.
Great. And last question for each one of you, and then I'll start with the group questions. Alex, I can't help but ask this question as a neuroscientist. What led Pymetrics to the very specific set of cognitive and behavioral skills and attributes that you use in your assessments?
Sure. Yeah.
And how are these changing? You know, how might you be changing these over time? Is it organically changing as your company develops?
Yeah, that's a great question. So back in the tides of history, what we did is we selected a large set of assessments that had been proven to have predictive power in kind of the context of cognitive science or psychology. And then what we had to do is we had to kind of winnow that down and figure out which ones could be meaningfully gamified, so played in a minute rather than, you know, over the course of many hours in a lab setting, which ones were actually predictive, and which ones were not kind of proxy variables for demographic variables like race and class that we were actually trying to avoid. And so what we ended up with was kind of a core set of 12 of these that we supplemented later with some additional ones focusing on numerical and logical reasoning. And we're constantly updating these, and we constantly have to. And, you know, I have my favorite that seems to really predict performance in one industry, and I have my least favorite, i.e. the one that kind of see where we have to do the most work to remove the implicit bias in that game. But luckily, the algorithm takes care of that on a day-by-day basis. And then what we do on the back end is we're updating the games. We're making them more socially relevant. So they're translated into dozens and dozens of languages at this point. We're going to bring new games online in the next year that focus on increasing demographic diversity in the games themselves and doing all of that sort of work. And then, you know, to your earlier question, we also have to make sure that the new games, when we deploy them, are just as valid as. So there are lots of hoops to jump through as we go through.
That's fascinating. So now that we're moving into, you know, questions that I'll lob out for both of you. I mean, I know that in AI specifically, right, and both of you noted that that building trust, right, is really critical. Trust in both AI and the people and companies that develop these tools. And you, of course, both also noted that there can and often are inherent and unintended biases in the data and in the analytics. So what are each of your organization's best practices and your recommendations, you know, for moving forward to help with this? When I think often we feel like we're in a really like ever-changing, fast, never-ending game of catch-up.
Rajen, you want to take that?
Sure, happy to. So it is very complicated just to try to figure out how to navigate that. And it starts all the way from the use case and really analyzing the use case. So one thing that we actually do is that when we have a use case we want to build AI around, we actually have a committee, a very cross-functional committee, and also a very diverse committee that takes a look at that use case from a variety of different angles and tries to spot issues that we might run into with that. And that really helps because it sets the framework for things that we then make sure that we prioritize before we actually release a product. The next part is during that product's life cycle. You need to do the right checks and the right tests throughout the development process to see where the model is biased. And so we've done some really interesting work to try to figure out tools that we can use to figure out you know, where that bias exists, and then figure out how do we actually supplement the data to correct for that bias. Then the last part is really in the real world, is that once that is out there, monitoring and figuring out how that works. Because the problem with an AI model is that it's actually a live thing, and it will drift and change over time. And so you have to actually keep monitoring that and figure out, is it changing in the right way or is it not changing in the right way, and keep iterating on that as
well. Yeah, I think that's a really good context. And I'm jealous, Rajen, that you keep getting to reinvent the wheel with every new client that you work with, building a new, totally different kind of model. We're actually in a really different space in some ways. We address different jobs and different clients in different industries, but in many ways we're always held to the same standard, which are kind of the standards defined by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which has a very kind of strict and rigorous set of assessments that they'll use to both assess, clients who are doing the hiring and us if it ever comes to that. And the interesting thing about this, and this is kind of a mismatch of expectations, is that they developed a statistical framework, close to 50 years ago that has had some updates over time, but really has not kept track, in my opinion, with the scale of things that are going on today. So one thing we do is we actually kind of treat that as a business side KPI that we optimize around, but we also run our own internal metrics using what we think are. And then, our objective is to kind of balance those two in order to maximize the value for everybody involved. And I think that's going to be a really interesting thing as we do start to get regulations in more fields, because the regulations, once deployed, will be out of date 45 seconds later, particularly with the scale of resources that Google and all this size.
Good point. Excellent point. So, of course, we're at Penn and at Wharton, so I have to ask, how do you see the workforce changing and responding to AI growth, and what kinds of skills and training will be most integral to this growth? How can we best prepare our students for exciting careers moving forward?
Yeah. From our perspective, one thing that we see a lot when we talk to our clients is that they are really interested in bringing on a diverse set of new employees and filling a variety of roles, but they're also really interested in moving folks around within an organization. And this is, almost away from the idea of the gig economy and back to the idea that a single person could work with one company for a long time and still have a lot of variety in their career. And so I think the big answer is be ready for change. Be ready for change and embrace it. We have people even in a company of our size who are switching roles dramatically from data to product or vice versa. And I think we should all be ready for this. And we should all have a little bit of an analytics feather in our cap because it'll help in a variety of the jobs that folks end up in.
Yeah, I think Alex is exactly correct. I think just like any technology, this is going to be a technology that will change the nature of the workforce going forward. And it's going to open up a lot of interesting opportunities, and it's actually going to transform different jobs that were there before into things that are new. And I think what Alex says is exactly right. Being nimble, understanding what your skills are, understanding how you can keep learning is going to be critical. Always been critical that, there's statistics about the skills that people learn in college, how much that changes over their career. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be even more true, and it's going to accelerate. People are going to keep needing to improve their skill set and think about what they want to get better at.
Great. I think that's really good, nice words and good recommendations from both of you. So my last question, I think, before it's probably time to wrap up, is this idea of as AI moves from research and development to broad commercialization, there's so much pressure to balance the need for innovation with the need for social acceptance, including regulation, which both of you have talked about. What's the best way to balance the need for innovators and consumers as well as society at large? That's a big question.
Yeah, it is a very tricky question. I think that the way that I would look at it is that there are many ways to be innovative, but you always have to keep looking at the impact. And we're at the really at the beginning of the impact of AI. And so I think we really have to look at how we shape this technology right now, because it's going to have implications 10, 20, 30 years down the road. So having those principles of how you want this to impact society as you build it and making sure that you're adhering to those principles, I think is something that we found to be very effective.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. In terms of the impact, you can both cushion the impact and kind of improve the impact over time just by being as transparent as possible. A lot of what we've learned is that people are really afraid of black boxes. And so the more explanation we can give to everything we deploy, the more comfortable the client is, the more comfortable an employer is, the candidate, and everyone involved, and the more comfortable the regulators. And it is going to be such a fast-moving field. Our algorithms are changing. I'm sure Rajan's are changing faster. And the only way for society to keep up is for us to use that transparency to actually educate folks on how these tools are built, what they're for, ways in which they fail, and to give them enough information to hold us accountable, so that we're not operating in a vacuum. And I think society is moving in the right direction in this one. I really think that we're going to do okay, but it's incredibly important that we get this right in the first decade or so of wide-scale deployment, because otherwise we'll be playing catch-up for a long time.
Excellent point. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for such fascinating talks and our dialogue. I really, really enjoyed getting to know both of you, and thank you very much for your time.